All Points Bulletin, or APB for short, was a subscription-based third-person cops and robbers MMO that was developed and published by Realtime Worlds. The game was released in North America on June 29th, 2010, and then in Europe on July 2nd. On top of being on the PC, it was also on the Xbox 360 and the PS3. The design was led by David Jones, one of the people responsible for the original Grand Theft Auto, and at the time, people were actually calling APB the GTA MMO. The game took place in a modern-day setting in the fictional city of San Pero, which had two types of districts: the social districts, where no one could kill anybody, and there were the action districts, where you could engage in PvP. The financial district was the large city with everything from skyscrapers to slums, and then there was the waterfront district, which was a little bit more suburban. One thing people really liked about this game was that the customization was great. There was a massive amount of options when it came to creating your character, and there was a wide selection of vehicles. Plus, here's a fun fact: you could even upload your own music to the car's radio. When you start, you get to choose to either be part of the law enforcement agency or a criminal, and they had this brilliant idea of having both cops and robbers doing missions against each other at the same time. Like, the criminals would try to commit a robbery, and then the cops would try to stop them from getting away, and both the cops and the robbers had their respective side missions. You also had options of how to go about doing all these missions, because you had access to less than lethal force such as tasers and beanbag rifles. And this was possible because on top of a health system, there was also a stamina system that all weapons affected. But if you wanted to go in guns a-blazing, leaving no survivors, there were well over 20 actual firearms you could choose from, and even a fucking rocket launcher. As you leveled, there was a modification system that you could use to upgrade your character, weapons, and car. But the upgrades also made some stats worse, and not all modifications were compatible with each other. Now, even though there were new ideas and innovations in APB, there were also some major problems, starting with the texture pop-ins. Numerous people found that when driving, they would hit buildings and walls that didn't load in properly, which is almost understandable seeing as how San Pero was this gigantic, persistent world. But that's literally just scraping the surface. To some, gameplay became repetitive and boring, even to the point where people called APB a rushed and unfinished game, even though it was rumored to be in development since 2005. The game also lacked reasonable NPC population, so the streets and sidewalks were sometimes barren, and there was also no bonus for shooting somebody in the head. It did the same amount of damage as getting hit in the leg. But these aren't my issues with All Points Bulletin. The biggest problem, in my opinion, was the original pay model. See, not only was it a buy-to-play game with a retail price of $50, they also implemented the worst subscription model I have ever seen. Remember the districts I was talking about earlier? Well, the action districts were on a timer. When you first buy the game, you get 50 hours of in-game time allowed in the action districts, but then you would have to pay an additional $7 for every 20 hours after that. And I would say this is a form of highway robbery if they didn't include an optional 30-day pass for $10 instead, making it a regular subscription model. But when asked why there was a fee to keep playing the game through a subscription, the developers stated they had state-of-the-art data centers that they had to keep running, claiming that there would be absolutely no network issues when playing. On top of this ludicrous idea that Realtime Worlds had to make gamers pay real money by the hour, they of course had their own virtual currency called RTW points, and you could buy more playtime with these points at a slightly discounted rate. But alright, say you don't pay them any money and you just spend the $50 up front, and then you run out of game time in the action districts. Well, the only place you're allowed to go then is the social district, where you're restricted to only customization and talking to other players, turning this cops and robbers MMO into a fucking chat room. But oh, I'm not done with this tomfoolery. See, in the social district, there's also an auction house. Now get this shit. There's also an RTW point fee for selling anything in the marketplace. So if you want to sell a car, that's 10 points. If you want to sell a shirt, that's 5 points. These minuscule charges were just a nuisance and a slap in the face to people that didn't buy any of the in-game currency. And the reasoning for this, when asked about it, was to stop the marketplace from being flooded with low-quality items. Which, I'm sorry, but to me that sounds like a bunch of baloney. Because the absolute lowest amount of points you could buy was 200, and some items only costed 2 points to sell. So what's stopping people from selling 100 small, low-value items at a time? And I think the real reason for all of these inconveniences set in place were to make up for the fact that the development of this game costed upwards to $100 million to make. And Realtime Worlds was trying desperately to break even by nickel and diming the APB community in any way that they saw possible. And on top of the poor optimization, and on top of the pop-ins, and the absolutely unforgivable pay model, there was also also a review embargo on this game that was set to be in effect even after the game came out, which they tried to justify by saying they wanted people to experience the full and rich experience of APB first, but all that did was get them heavily criticized for their poor decision to silence reviewers, or at least try to. And when the reviews did get published, they pointed out all the flaws I previously mentioned, and at the end of the day giving all Points Bulletin average scores at best, most agreeing that the game was less than adequate for what Realtime Worlds was charging to play it. In fact, this game was such a disaster that Realtime Worlds started laying off most of its staff. All Points Bulletin was shut down only 3 months after its release, and it's a game that actually disintegrated its developing company. Realtime Worlds had to sell pretty much everything and was announced as defunct in late 2010. But that wasn't the end for APB. As most of you probably know, the game was acquired by K2 Network, a subsidiary of GamersFirst, and they merged with Reloaded Games to create APB Reloaded, which came out on December 6, 2011. The game was fully converted to free-to-play and had a boatload of content added to it. You're still able to play APB Reloaded, but it's not without fault. The game is still met with mixed reviews, and longtime players of the game insist they have been lied to by the developers numerous times, including a promised engine upgrade that apparently took 3 years to implement and was reported to only be finished so they could release the game on new generations of consoles. A small part of the community has also been heavily criticized for being toxic, but the customization in the game continues to be praised by people who play it. APB was the perfect example of something that worked extremely well on paper but ended up failing in practice. There are so many great ideas that either fell short of expectation or never got the chance to get implemented. I remember the hype for this game being absolutely massive, and it was called revolutionary and innovative, and it's so unfortunate that poor business practice ended up destroying this game and the company that made it. Although I am happy that the new developer was able to bring this game back to life and successfully rebrand it as a free-to-play game. But if you created a vigilante cop or hardened criminal doing whatever it took to earn your cash, driving around in your pimped out vehicle, listening to your imported music while wearing your flashy new clothes, till you smash into an unrendered brick wall and get imprisoned in a social district for not helping the developers fund their totally awesome super mega data center, then All Points Bulletin is a game you might remember. As always, if you stuck around this long, thank you very much. It means the world to me. Feel free to leave a comment sharing your experience with APB or APB Reloaded. If you're a fan of the Games You Might Remember series, feel free to subscribe. But if you're not, then don't worry. I also open the discussion on various other topics in gaming. If you want to have a personal conversation with me, then don't forget about the Daily Quest Discord. There'll be a link in the description. And we also have a Facebook if you're into that sort of thing. Peace out.